Hello, everybody. If you are unfamiliar, my name is Zack Arnold. I'm a former Hollywood film and television editor, turned career strategist and podcaster, and I'm also the creator of Optimize Yourself. And I am here today on this awesome panel with not just one, but four amazingly talented, brilliant editors amongst a variety of different genres. Now, unlike all of the conversations that our panelists have probably had specifically about their shows and their craft and their process, today's conversation is going to go beyond the timeline. So I'm going to make sure that we include in the show notes links to all of their other amazing conversations where they talk about their process and working on their nominated shows. But today, what I really want to talk about with all of you, what makes us irreplaceable creatives? As much as all of us probably want to avoid it, artificial intelligence is not going away. But for anybody that follows me, you know that I'm not part of the doom and gloom crowd. I think that there's a ton of value that all of us bring to the table as both editors and as creatives that simply cannot be replaced by technology. And that is what we're going to dive into a whole lot more today with all four of our panelists. So without further ado, I would like to introduce first Malinda Zehner Guerra, who's the Emmy-nominated editor on A Black Lady sketch show. Then we have Fady Jeanbart, who's an editor on the thriller feature Till Death Do Us Part. Third, we have Matthew D. Miller, Emmy-nominated editor on RuPaul's Drag Race Untucked. And last but not least, we have Stephanie Filo, who is the Emmy-nominated editor on A Black Lady sketch show, History of the World Part 2, and Dahmer. And no, that is not a typo. Stephanie has 3 simultaneous Emmy nominations on 3 different shows. I'm already exhausted and we haven't even gotten started, but Malinda, Steph, Fady, Matthew, it is a pleasure to have this conversation with you today. So I appreciate all of you being here.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
Cool. All right. So here's where we're going to get started. It's going to be a little bit off the beaten path. I know a lot of people when they interview you, they always ask, tell us how you got into the biz. How did you break in and what's your path and how did you get to being an Emmy nominated editor? What I want to talk about instead of that is all of your diverse career portfolios. I think there's something really interesting and unique about all four of you, where if you were to look at your IMDb Pro resumes, they're kind of head scratchers. It's like, how did this happen, right? So many different paths and so many different unique genres and mediums that all of you have worked on. And I really believe in the value of career diversification because I think that so many of us get pigeonholed so easily. Just as a little bit of shameless self-promotion, if anybody wants to know Stephanie's 90-minute version of her entire career path and her history and how she was pigeonholed and how she overcame it, well, we've got a podcast interview for that. Just go into the Optimize Yourself archives. But I want to start with you, Stephanie, with a very, very brief version of how you believe the diversification of all of your work experience, your life experiences, and otherwise have brought you to where you are as a 3-time simultaneous Emmy nominee.
That's intense to to get started. I think for me, so there was a time where I was working like exclusively on true crime series, right? I did that for like 6 straight years, and I was just like every job opportunity that came up was another true crime series. And so I just like worked really hard to try to change the type of content that I was working on. I started kind of turning down crime stuff, and I was like, how long can I go without finding something else? Just so I could, hold off and see if I could track down stuff. I told everybody that I knew that I wanted to, it's like not dissing the true crime genre, but also just saying like, hey, I would love to, also, dip my toes in these different things as well. So it's like just telling everybody that I knew, like what I kind of was trying to do. And I feel like creatively, and I'm sure all of you guys can speak to this, is just, it's a lot more fulfilling to me being able to learn more aspects of the craft from different genres. And so I think ever since then, and once I kind of got out of the true crime side of it and was branching into these other areas, I was like, I'm learning so much, and there's like different techniques that maybe I learned from this one that I can apply to this, and it just makes our jobs much more interesting, especially collaboratively, because it's, for example, like on A Black Lady sketch show, Malinda and we've worked on several things over the years, but we've also worked on very different things as well, and it's nice to be able to say like, oh, why don't you try this technique here and this technique here, and I think for all of us, it's just a really good way to be able to flex our creative muscles just to have different genres as much as we can.
So, if we were going to break down your career portfolio, so to speak, into the simplest terms, it seems to me it would be you've got unscripted reality, you've got unscripted true crime, you've got a whole bunch of different areas of scripted. So, if you were to create a few bullet points just to help characterize all the things you've done, which again, we barely were able to cover this in 90 minutes, but if you've got 90 seconds, how would you break down all the different areas that you've worked? Just for anybody listening that doesn't know you or your path, has some idea of all the various areas that you've worked before.
Sure. I've worked in reality, documentary, PSAs, commercials, trailers, scripted comedy, scripted sketch, scripted drama, scripted horror, and also, between TV and features as well. So just everything I can get my hands on.
I love it. And we're going to talk a whole lot more about how that provides value in all those contexts, but I want to make sure we get to know everybody else here a little bit better. So I'm going to transition now to Malinda, secondly. And again, a little bit of shameless self-promotion. Anybody that wants to hear Malinda's extended story hasn't even been released yet, but we have recorded it and it will be coming out shortly. Now, Malinda, you and I met about 3-4 years ago when you were very much in the messy middle of how do I make the transition from unscripted editor to scripted editor. And had I known that we'd work together and you would get an Emmy nomination before me, I never would have mentored you. Very, very upset about that. Of course I'm not. I'm very, very happy for you and have been doing nothing but singing your praises in our group. But what I want you to do is share something very similar to Stephanie. For those that don't know anything about you or your story, how would you characterize all of the different things that you've worked on in the past, ultimately leading to your nomination on a Black Lady sketch show?
I think ultimately, Steph and I think, have very similar stories. And we also worked together back in the day. I think it was like 2013 on a paranormal show, which is where we first met. So off and on, we've been working together over the years. But I actually started in the business as an actor. So I came into it from like being in front of the camera, and then moved into editing and started out in reality. I actually started with commercials for the gas company and then got into reality and did a lot of kind of the docu-follow. I did a ton of paranormal and adventure travel, and then got into competition shows. I've done a season of Drag Race All Stars. I did Making It. And I think ultimately, and then tried to move more into the scripted space. And it's just, for me, I don't want to be doing the same thing all the time. I think that's why a lot of people get into the entertainment industry, because you do think it's going to be all this like flexibility and different kind of work and getting to do all these different things and tell different stories, which is sometimes true. And sometimes, it's very much you're 12 hours in a room, like, and it's not that different. But after, kind of just being in the kind of docu-follow for a bit on like Total Divas and the Kardashians, I was like, I gotta do something a little bit different just for my own, not getting bored and not feeling stale. So, and the more different genres I had, just like Steph said, you learn all these other tricks, you learn different ways people approach cutting things, a transition in unscripted between scenes is very different, even within from like a competition show to a docu-follow, like how you manage those. And I think ultimately that all helps when you're then moving even into the scripted space. You have a ton of, and definitely helped with a show like Black Lady Sketch Show, where we are moving from genre to genre like every 3 days. So, I cut those paranormal shows. I could do a kind of horror sketch and then move the next day into something that was more, traditional comedy. And that was kind of that journey. So it probably looks like a mess, but it ended up flowing.
Well, and what I love about what you said so much is this idea that you value all of the diversity and doing all the different genres. But as we'll talk about further, the industry sees a square peg and it wants the square peg to fit into the square hole, right? And there's this idea of being pigeonholed. And anybody that's followed me for any length of time knows that I believe we don't get pigeonholed. We allow ourselves to be pigeonholed because we keep saying yes to the same things over and over and over. And as Stephanie mentioned, I said no. I finally was like, no, I have to say no to true crime, and we can clearly see where that got her. But this idea of it being a mess, or the word that I use often is scattershot, that's seen as a liability, and I want people to understand what an asset that is. And I think I've got four amazing people to share that, which brings me next to Fady. You have some stiff competition, but if the competition were the most scattershot resume that makes no sense whatsoever, you might edge out even Steph on this one. Because you look at yours and I see editor, but I see composer and assistant camera. It's like, what in the world? So give me a little bit more of a clear picture of how you would classify your career portfolio.
So I came from Egypt in 2012, and I studied filmmaking at New York Film Academy here in Los Angeles. And while I'm studying, I was working a lot on set, like grip, PA, AD, DIT, everything that I can learn. What I want to know, I know what I want to know. I want to be a film director, but at the same time, I want to know everyone doing what on set, anything, you know what I mean? I want to know everything. So I graduated, I worked on a lot of short films as a director and music videos, commercials. One of my short films went to Short Corner in Cannes Film Festival 2018 as a director and editor. I was the editor of the movie too. And then I got opportunity to be in an Emmy Award TV show called Studio City. And I see you behind you, it's Cobra Kai Pillow. So I'm sure you're familiar with Sean Cannon.
Oh, yes.
So Sean Cannon, he is the producer and the lead actor of Studio City. On season 1, season 2, we got season 1, we got a few Emmys, daytime Emmy. And then I began to be the editor of season 2 with the same director. And then after that, the same director, Timothy Woodward Jr., I worked with him until that was part as an editor. So I worked in everything, I would say.
Yeah, and we're going to talk a whole lot more about how I think that diversity brings so much strength, and I think that you're going to have a really interesting perspective beyond just the post-production world, because you've done so many things on set, in production, and elsewhere, and I definitely want to dive deeper into all that. But now we have a little bit clearer understanding of where you came from and where you are now. Now to, last but not least, introduce Matthew D. Miller. If I go on IMDb Pro, seems like a very, very clear path and trajectory because it's just a bunch of editor credits, but something tells me there's much more than meets the IMDb Pro resume. I bet there's a whole lot of stuff that isn't on here that got you your first editor credit, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, so I started off, I went to Vassar College. I didn't know what I wanted to, major in. I thought I was gonna be an English major at first. And then all of a sudden occurred to me, I was like always watching films and big into films at the time. And then I realized, I was like, wait, I can major in film. Like, why don't I do that? So I changed majors and had a great professor, Ken Robinson, who actually edited Purple Rain and Who Framed Roger Rabbit. And so I ended up we were editing, literally splicing together film. This was it was after there was one Avid, and after I graduated, they of course redid the film department, and then they got a bunch of Avids and everything. But yeah, so he was an awesome mentor. And then I kind of started in the really television industry. I was working at Postworks and client services, and great shows like The Wire were being cut around me. Queer Eye, the original Queer Eye, was being cut around me. Robert De Niro's Good Shepherd, big films and everything. And I think Postworks still exists, but anyway, so I was just doing odds and ends, and eventually I ended up on a show called Shalom in the Home as an associate producer. It was my first freelance job. It was a TLC reality show. I think I got 2 seasons. And but I was always wanting to edit. Like I said, I would see editors in especially at Postworks, like Queer Eye, that original one made a huge splash, and I was like, wow, these guys are so cool. I was always trying to ask them questions about what it was like being an editor. And long story short, I was at a small company at the right time, and they had this show, Pawn Stars, that was starting to be a big reality show, and I was like, I can edit. and I started editing. I didn't. A lot of people assistant edited first. I did not do that. I did not take that route. I took a different route where I did a bunch of kind of like APing, and I even did some casting. And yeah, and then just worked on a bunch of different unscripted reality shows, mostly sort of in that, like, at the time what would be considered like male programming, sort of like History Channel, Pawn Stars, Counting Cars, stuff like that. And I heard that Queer Eye was getting a reboot, and I just had to get on it, and I was able to get on that show, and work with some amazing people. And it's just a really, at the time, I feel like it was especially with what was going on in the country, like it was just like a nice bit of positivity that everybody needed. And yeah, that luckily, like, I feel very lucky for this, but that led to 2 Emmy wins for editing and a bunch of others for everybody else for 2 years in a row. And then yeah, I ended up a few years later editing on Drag Race Untucked. I did last season, and then I was lead editor this past season, and I love it. Of course, to be totally honest, and this might not be a shock to some of you guys, I don't watch a lot of reality TV. I love it. I love working on it, and I do watch some of it. I watch it mostly with my wife. Watches a little bit more than I do, and I do watch it some with her. But I watch scripted stuff almost exclusively, in documentaries. I do love Drag Race. I love Queer Eye. My wife loves Love Is Blind, so I've watched some of that with her. But you know, I like to think that when I'm editing reality, when I'm editing unscripted, I'm just doing my thing. I'm just sort of listening to whatever feels right inside. I know that sounds kind of cheesy. I'm a songwriter as well. I do music, and I write songs. There's sort of a similar part of the brain to me. And if something just doesn't feel right, it's like a feeling almost. I'll tweak it, and I always listen to that. I try to listen to that inner voice as much as possible on the first pass of everything. And a big buzzword in unscripted is, we want it to be more cinematic. We want it to be more cinematic. You know, we always hear that all the time in the notes. Well, I've been trying to do that ever since I started in this job. I've always thought, well, why does it have to be this way? Why can't it be like that? Why can't it be like this film or this scripted show that I watch? So anyway, that's sort of my approach. I probably left out a lot, but
well, that's all right. I'll pull out the rest that you left out, because I think this is the perfect thread to start pulling on, and it's the direction that I want to go. I'm not surprised at all that there's more to you than the resume, and that's really a theme that I want to talk about more, is how we are much more than our resumes, and we're much more than our job titles. And I think that the diversity we have, whether it is literally who we are as a person, where we came from, our life experiences, or the skills that we've developed in multiple genres or even mediums, that is an asset. Why it's seen as a liability in this industry, I could do a 30-minute TED Talk about how much this annoys me. Not going to do it right now. Malinda knows that I have a tendency to pull out a soapbox and do a TED Talk. Not going to do that. But there's
I'm constantly going on about this too. I mean,
good. So I think you and I are kindred spirits for sure. So this is an area that I want to dig into deeper. And just for a point of procedure, anytime that anybody wants to they want to come into the conversation and add to it, you know, just kind of raise your hand or let me know. It doesn't have to be I have to go around and ask you, but in general, I'll just kind of go back right now in reverse order, but anybody can chime in. But if I'm going to go to you now, Fady, what I want to talk about more, and this really applies to all of you, is that as we're learning and growing in our careers, there's a certain amount of necessary skills that we have to develop. We have to learn storytelling and how to cut a scene. We have to learn Avid or Premiere or Final Cut, whatever your NLE of choice is. But I've always argued that after a certain point, what differentiates you, Fady, from Malinda, from Steph, from Matthew, or the other people that you're competing against for a job is none of those things, because we all meet a certain level of qualifications, and we have much more unique creative skills that differentiate us, whether it's the number of languages we speak literally, the languages that we speak filmically. In every genre, every medium is a different language. So I'm curious, Fady, from your perspective, given you have such a diverse background, What do you think are some of the key skills that you bring to the table that are uniquely you based on all of the diversity that you have in your background?
I mean, for me is I studied filmmaking, so I studied everything in college. I studied directing, editing, screenwriting, cinematography, producing, everything. And this, of course, helped me in storytelling. What helped me too, I came from another culture. I came from another place. So I already watching movies that maybe a lot of people are not watching here, Arabic language or something. I know like a lot of people now watching international everything, but I came already with this mentality. It was me before, you know. And of course in Egypt we were watching a lot of English, watching a lot of European, French especially style, and they have different French, they have different, or Europe, they have different storytelling style. So everything it's inside me. And of course when I started, I'm like, oh, now it makes sense. This makes sense, or that makes sense, or why they did this or why they did that. These kind of things. Of course, this helped me too. Editing wise, I would say I learned at school. They give us Avid, the standard, and after Avid, as an editor, for me, I like to see every software editing, and I like to learn every one. I don't have like one. I'm not only working on Avid. I'm not working on Premiere. I'm not working. It depends on the project. It depends on if I'm sitting like in a meeting and I'm telling them like, hey, this project, I can do it on this software or something. And then they ask me why, or like, no, I like this software or something. And then I answer like my reasons. They will think, okay, you know, this guy knows what he's doing. This guy knows what's happening here. You know what I mean? Of course, if it makes sense, of course. Otherwise,
yeah, and I love the fact that you've prioritized specifically learning beyond one specific NLE. This is another one of my pet peeves that I'm slowly starting to see go away. But for years and years, especially when I was first coming up, when you had a job listing or somebody had their title on a resume, Avid editor, Final Cut editor, Premiere editor, it's like, no. That's just the tool, right? Yeah. It's like saying, I am a Stanley saw carpenter. I am a Ryobi carpenter. It's like, no, you're a carpenter, right? You build, you tell stories. And I love the idea that you embraced all the tools, especially given how rapidly the tools are changing right now. And even what is editing going to look like in 3 to 5 years when we have all of these generative AI programs and all of the things that we do that we consider part of our jobs that'll probably be automated. I really believe there's still a key component of what we do as editors and storytellers that simply cannot be replicated no matter what, at least if people are interested in good stories. If you're interested in garbage, we're pretty close to the edit button. We're almost there. We're not quite there, but we're pretty close. Matthew, you wanted to add to that.
No, I just want to say, like, the other question I have is like, everybody's like, AI is going to take over everything, and like, you know, make these broad stroke statements about these things. And what I wonder is like, would we as audience members be okay with that? I don't want to when I'm watching something or listening to a song, I like the notion that there is a human being behind it. Do you know what I mean? I mean,
completely.
We have to ask ourselves that question too. And I think that's an important question. I think a lot of people would reject the idea that AI would completely create art. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know if we really want that. Can it be used as a tool for some things? Sure, of course.
Yeah, and I agree with that completely. And I think that there's going to be a subset of a future audience that's just asking for more of "ow, my balls." I just think that's going to be part of the content creation. But I think there's going to be a much larger subset of people that say, I watch stories because I want to understand the human experience. I want to know that I'm collectively going through the same thing that other people are going through, and we want to understand humanity together. AI doesn't replace that. So having said that, I now want to move on. Let's go to Steph for a second. Kind of similar question. There's a certain level at which we have to gather our hard skills and the necessary technical abilities and creative abilities. But then there's that threshold between everybody could do the job versus how our diversity makes us stronger storytellers. So how would you encapsulate some of the strengths that you've developed that make you uniquely you?
Well, I mean, ultimately, our job as editors is to tell stories as authentically as we can, right? And all of these, all of these different characteristics that I might have as a person, that I might have from all of my prior experience, are just tools that help us tell these stories more authentically, you know. So, you know, it really depends obviously on the project, like what pieces of things you're using, but it's also, I mean, to me, I'm like, why wouldn't you want someone with the most like diverse skill set to tell a story? Because it's like you're approaching it differently. When you think about, you know, unscripted versus scripted, and unscripted, a lot of the times you're creating a story on your own. You're going through like thousands of hours of footage to come up with like some story that makes sense and character arcs that take you through like a whole season of something. You know, why wouldn't you want that on a scripted project? You need to be able to like think on the fly. You need to be able to like see nuance in different characters. So to me, I think it's just like massively important to have these different avenues to tell a story, because ultimately, yeah, it's about telling the best story you can. And if you can say like, hey, you know, I worked on, you know, this project, this paranormal project with Malinda years and years ago, but I remember I did this one thing there, and now I'm cutting like a, you know, a paranormal sketch. I can apply that technique to this. I just think it's super helpful for all of us. You know, it's almost like a shorthand where you're like, okay, this is how I'm going to approach this. Maybe I can use like a comedy, you know, music technique here, and it's a dramatic scene. You know, it's all super critical. And then, you know, as far as us as people, like I will always approach something with my own perspective as a Black woman, as someone whose family is from another country. Like I have my own personal perspectives, and I think that's also really important to bring to any project as well, because, you know, I might see something different than you might see something, Zach, or then Malinda might see something. So it's like, why not have people with these like diversity of experiences and wealth of knowledge, because we're all learning from each other every day.
Clearly, I agree with all of this. However, for the sake of this next conversation, I want to point out the biggest fallacy in your argument, which is that you're using this thing called common sense. And the industry doesn't see it that way, right? And I know that you and I have talked about this more extensively, but you have gotten objection after objection after objection about why all of the things that you said are not actually valuable, and I want you to be the square peg in the square hole. So talk to me a little bit about some of the objections of you trying to make one of the many medium or genre transitions that you have, and why all the people tell you you can't do it.
Well, you know, I always go back to like one of the very first projects I worked on. One of the older male editors on that project was like, oh, a Black woman could never cut this. And I was like, that doesn't, what, how, and why, what, that doesn't make sense. Cool, thanks. And so I spent all my time on that project just trying to prove him wrong, you know. And then it's like you go into, say, jumping from unscripted to scripted. I think people don't realize how much work the editor does in unscripted. You're doing music, you're doing sound, you're responsible for story, for pacing, you know. So it's like they would think like, oh, there's just someone that like throws stuff together, it's messy, or it's, you know, it's reality, or, you know, there's kind of like this weird taboo about it, at least that I found in making that transition. There's also the issue of like, you know, say, because also this industry looks at your last credit, you know, instead of saying like, oh, look at, here's this body of experience. It's like, oh, the last thing you worked on was like a comedy. Why would you be appropriate for this like dramatic story, you know? So it's kind of always just trying to, I think for, at least for me, and I assume for you guys as well, like it's a matter of like trying to explain these things to people in interviews where, you know, you might be in a job interview for something that's like, oh, this is a little different than something else that I've cut before, but you can explain like, hey, I know how to make this happen. I know from this reality show, like I had to insert a person into this scene that was not there before. I had to make this person funny who was not funny. I had to make this a dramatic moment that was not dramatic. So it's all like, you know, I think there's always this misunderstanding about what we do in these different genres, and ultimately we're doing the same thing. We're trying to tell a good story.
Yeah, and one of the things that I'm again gonna caution myself to not get on a soapbox about is the difference in prestige between unscripted and scripted and how they're viewed differently. And I don't know how many of you saw this recently, but at least as of recording this, I'm hoping this can be a much more evergreen conversation. But as of recording this, we are neck deep in the middle of this gigantic mess of a strike. And I saw this job posting or job postings going around about something that had to do with unscripted projects, and all of the scripted editors that are out of work are like, "Ooh, look, we can do the unscripted in the meantime." I'm like, you guys have no idea. You have no idea, right? No clue what you're getting yourselves into, because you're thinking, well, we're at the top of the ladder, we're at the prestige scripted, we're going to take a step back to unscripted so we can pay our bills. And what I've seen over and over and over is this assumption, well, if I do scripted, of course I could do unscripted. By the way, vice versa. And it's not to say that you can't do both, but I think everybody here would agree that they're different languages. You have to be multilingual and develop this skill set. And I was just literally laughing out loud with people saying, oh, well, there are still unscripted opportunities, so we can do that until the scripted work comes back. And I'm thinking, number one, you have no idea the competition against you and people that have more experience. But number two, just the assumption that you think you can just do it. I mean, I have such tremendous respect for unscripted editors and what they have to go through. I'm like, this is not for me. I could not do this. I tried, wasn't my thing. It's just way too complex, too much material for me. So I wanna make the transition now to Malinda, because if anybody is fresh off the transition from the unscripted world to the scripted world that can really talk about this perception of who you are and who you're supposed to be, it's you, because you're brand new to the scripted world. So talk to me a little bit more about your experience and the perceptions of the skills people think you have versus the ones that you believe to be the most valuable.
Yeah, I think that's a deep question.
Did you expect anything less? Come on, I've been putting you on the hot seat for 3.5 years.
I think people forget, yeah, that we pull from so many things in order to tell a story. And as Steph was saying, in unscripted, there's so much. We are writing a lot of times, we often have story producers, but at the same time, you're going back into that raw footage and finding moments or one word or something to connect scenes, because you're making it, about something that was only one sentence. Now we want this whole restaurant scene to be about somebody's dad, but they only mentioned their dad once. So then you're pulling from 18 other days and covering it. And some of that is, when you then run into a problem in a scripted show, you're ready to be like, oh, well, I know I saw something the other day in these dailies that I could probably cheat to cover this, and then we can just add some ADR and make it work. And it comes naturally after you've been in that kind of, MacGyvering a scene together world for so long that, a lot of, not to be negative, but I think maybe a lot of scripted editors don't have that experience, because you're used to being like, this is what was shot and this is what I have. And they don't naturally come to that. So I think that's like the biggest asset that you have to make that transition, to be able to say like, well, I can make something out of nothing. And if you're giving me this intentionally planned out, thought out, shot scene, then that's a great base to start from. And I have all these other skills to really make it something special. And I think that's the big asset that we have coming from unscripted, having all, and especially if you've got a bunch of different varieties, you have so many tricks. And that's what I think people kind of don't realize as much. And that the more you let people go between genres or between scripted, unscripted, documentary, music videos, like, you're just going to get something so much more than something like, this is kind of how we always do it. So I think that's the big kind of bonus that we have to kind of make that transition. And those were then things you really had to sell as well, like, no, I know how to do this or that. So, but once you get to show those skills, it helps.
And I've seen that firsthand many times, both on the editor level and the assistant editor level. where I've seen more than once where I've shared a wall with an editor on a TV series, and it's a really challenging episode. Maybe the structure didn't work on the page, or maybe there was two scenes that they didn't make their day, and now how do we tell the story without these scenes? Or they meant to get 17 setups and they got 4, right? And what I'll see more often than not is the editor say, well, this is what you gave me, I'm sorry. And the showrunners and the producers and the directors are like, yeah, but let's see if we can make it into something different. It's like, okay, tell me what to do. Make me a list of notes of all the things that I need to fix. And as an editor, it's your job to be able to fix those problems. So one of the things I always tell showrunners and directors is, in your notes, don't give me solutions, just give me the problems. It's my job to fix them. But when you don't have that tool set, it's like, this is what you gave me, sorry. Well, you know, once you get to a certain level, you're not going to last too long anymore if that's the tool set that you have. And I've seen over and over and over, especially with assistant editors, where I've seen reality or unscripted assistants come to scripted, and it's like 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and they come in and they're like, is this it? Is this all I have to do? They're like, I didn't have to transcode 27 different cameras, and everything had a slate and everything was jam synced. And like, what am I supposed to do with the rest of my day? Whereas the flip side of it is, you get an assistant editor that came up the scripted route and they're like, oh, there's one shot and a GoPro that did not have the time code jam sync, so I'm not going to be able to get you your dailies. I'm like, can you just figure it out maybe? Like, it's, so I see that difference in the immense amount of skill development that you get from the unscripted world that I think so many people take for granted or take advantage of or even look down upon. And I one of the main purposes of this conversation is to really understand how we all bring this diverse skill set as storytellers, not as I'm a scripted editor, I'm a drama editor, I'm a comedy editor, I'm a, you know, shiny floor competition show editor. And Malinda, you have taught me so much about unscripted, like, genres and all. Like, I thought there was unscripted and scripted, and there's like 47 genres just within unscripted. It's fascinating to me. I want to go back to Matthew for a second, because I think I got you pretty riled up when I started talking about artificial intelligence and whether or not we want to consume this kind of content, of which I certainly have very little, if no interest in consuming it. But I want to talk a little bit more from the craft side. I don't know any more than anybody else does. I'm not a prognosticator and I don't know where we're going next, but I have a high level of confidence that we as editors and storytellers are going to be largely safe from artificial intelligence, but I think our jobs are going to change significantly. I think our workflows are going to change, how, you know, whatever the day-to-day looks like, the storytelling process. But what do you feel, number one, about whether or not you're afraid of artificial intelligence replacing you? And if you're not, why?
Well, first of all, just as a human being, I am such a day-to-day person, like living in the now, that I don't worry about things maybe in the future, and not maybe as much as I should. But I also just think that no matter what, it's just such a nuanced skill, art form, what we do, that I think that AI I just don't know that it could. I could be eating my words, of course, in a year or two.
We could all be eating our words in 3 months, right. So don't worry about
it. But again, I think it comes back to maybe what I was saying before, and that I think that we value the human touch as audience members. I think as editors and storytellers ourselves, it's sort of like we're inspired by our favorite filmmakers and editors and cinematographers and songwriters, and all of that kind of goes into it, you know. And I think that to lose that connection, human connection, I just think that this is not something that, okay, maybe yes, maybe there's like, you know, like with my son, like on YouTube, we were watching this obviously AI generated, like, what are these logos? And it was like logos from like Starbucks, from like all over, like every company you could think of. And they were like quizzes, and I think just made by like an AI generator somewhere. And for something like that, okay, fine. Yes, I'm sure there will be AI created content like that. But I think that when it comes to appreciating scripted, or not just unscripted, just content, longer form content or shorter form content, that we want that connection to the artists, to the various artists behind that. I mean, I'm constantly, when I watch a film, like I just finished, we just finished The Bear. I just watched Beef with my wife, which was amazing. I don't know if anybody's seen that, but like I'm like start like reading about all the people working on it, and like I go down rabbit holes, and like that's part of it for me. And I think that there's a lot of other people who don't even work in this industry who are like that as well, and to lose that, I think is losing something that I don't think we want to lose, but what I do think, like I could see it like a role that it could play in is like, you were talking about like a scene like where you need to have them say talk about this dad conversation or whatever. Say there's a reality show, and like we need to like have it be, see the story somewhere that happens somewhere else, or and we need them to these certain words be said. Well, AI could potentially look for all the instances of that, rather than you going through a transcript and finding it and putting it into a string, and then you can pull from that. Like, I think that could be useful, maybe. But, when you have 10 mics going on, and, I don't think it's going to be perfect either. So, like, or maybe like find me any sunrise shot, like something like that, that we have to work with. I think in ways like that, I could see it being useful, maybe not game changing though. So that's kind of where I am at.
I agree with that, and I fully embrace anything that allows us to be creative more and sift through the garbage less. So, like, for example, I'm putting together a training montage right now of months and months worth of students becoming Spartan racers, and I just want to say, give me the 10 best shots of people doing pull-ups. I don't want to have to scan through 10 different camera rolls to find it, right? But then the question becomes, well, wait a second, I'm the assistant editor. Isn't that my job? And one thing that I want to throw in there that I'm very conscious of is that I don't think that AI replaces assistants either. Because if it's a matter of, let's say that I have the assistant editor button and it's my AI, well, that means that I have to manage the tech stack and I have to manage the technology. I still want an assistant editor just as much, and frankly, even more than I do now, because I don't want to learn any of this crap. I just want to be able to say, here are the things that I need, and they could manage the technology. So I think, like I said, it's going to be a transition of roles and responsibilities. But I think if anything, our workforce expands because of the demand. But I think that what we're going to be asking of our assistants or of our other editors or our team members is going to change. And if I could just chat GPT style say, show me all the best shots of this thing, put it in a string up, boom, done, rather than that's half my day. Right? That to me is going to be an important part of the process. But I don't believe that the human skills that we have are going to be replaced. So I want to come back to you, Fady, because you've really kind of seen the gamut of all the different areas of the industry. Let's talk not so much about the creative skills and the timeline or the storytelling skills. I bet you've developed a series of human skills, meaning communication or time management or managing expectations. I mean, everything. I think every editor on the planet has to be a therapist to some extent. So beyond just the creative side of things, what are some of the human skills that you believe that you've developed and honed from all of the diverse areas that you've worked in the industry?
Wow. With the AI or without AI?
No, you as a human. I want to know, what are the things that we're not going to be able to press the edit button or the assistant edit button? What are the human skills that you believe you've strengthened because you've done so many different things in so many different areas?
I would say more communication and relationship, like as an editor, relationship between me and the director, like fighting every day or laughing every day, staying with him or her for months, edit a film or a TV series or something like that. The communication is the most important thing. Feedbacks, I need to be very open-minded, like not the best thing I did. I need to be like, oh, okay, I did this cut, it looks perfect, but when someone else will look and like, not really, it's bad or something like this, I'll be like, oh, okay, I need to figure it out, something like that. But I would like actually to go about the AI thing. if
Go
I can.
right ahead, please.
So actually AI, I'm totally agree with you guys. But still AI in general, I mean, it's still learning from us, and it will learn from us. So it will never like affect creative or affect people. It will make us life easier, faster, and these kind of things, of course, 100%. And actually, my wife took a certificate class at Stanford University in AI, and they still, even people who are really like working in AI in general, they still don't know where's this going. Maybe it will be better as everything like ChatGPT or any other app or something, but still, we're still human, we're still having this brain. It will be us in the end of the day. Like, for example, take it this way, like the computer, when we begin working on computers, take it like the same. It's like, oh, it's a new thing, oh, it's going to affect me, I'm not going to work or something like that. And actually you learn computer, and then you begin, oh, okay, actually this is faster, this make my life easier, and these kind of things. So AI will help us to be better.
I totally agree. What I want to caution people against, though, is this idea that faster and easier are the same things. I think it's going to make us faster, but we can also very easily fall into the black hole of productivity, which is, ooh, we have all this space to do more. Like what I always use as an example is, how many of you are using all of the extra free time that you have because you're not banging your clothes against rocks, right? Washers and dryers, those we're going to revolutionize. We don't have to spend hours and hours going to the river and banging our clothes against rocks and washboards and hanging them up.
Yeah.
Think of all the free time that we'll have. Nobody has that free time. And I think that AI can both be a benefit, but it can also be a tremendous danger, which again is this constant change where today's miracle becomes tomorrow's expectation. And I think we have to be really careful about not crossing that line, and AI is going to accelerate it faster than any technology has before. Matt, you had something you wanted to add.
No, just really quickly. I mean, yeah, like I think you said this before, but like we're gonna then sort of have to manage the AI and then go over it and make sure the AI like made good calls. You know what I mean? That in itself, it's like, although, and now I have my AI employee to deal with. You know what I mean? Like, and make sure their work. So it is going to create a whole other set of work and issues. So
yeah, and I've been doing a lot of experimentation really for the last couple of years behind the scenes in my business, understanding how to automate and delegate and how to use technology as much as possible, because I don't have the money to just bring in more people and pay them to solve problems. So just like a really low budget indie filmmaker, you can't solve the problem with money, so you need to be creative. And I've been looking into AI, and what I have found is that there are a lot of things that it makes easier, but I still need somebody to manage every single step of the process, such that I basically have a member of my team that's transitioned to being my AI czar. Anything that has to do with AI and automations, can you just monitor it? Because you still have to review everything. So if anything, it's created a position as opposed to a position that I didn't even need before. So that's why I'm really not worried about this at all. And there are a whole lot of reasons that I'm not as concerned about this as many others are, but there's one thing above all else, and this is what I want to get into next. So I'm going to transition to you, Steph, first, and then I want everybody to dive into this. But if I were to characterize in one sentence why I'm not concerned about artificial intelligence, it's the note underneath the note. Imagine if every time we got a note from a producer or director that said, do this thing, and we just did it. What a shit show that would be, right? It's the reason that I think we have inherent value is our ability to know the note underneath the note. What are your thoughts on that, Steph?
Yeah, I mean, I always think about, like, you know, the AI generated commercials and like music videos, and they just look absolutely insane. And I think that's just, you know, it will always take whatever, you know, description it's given literally, right? So it's like, okay, I was not expecting to see this in a music video, and then you see something that's absolutely wild. So it's always, no matter what, and it's what you guys have been talking about, is just there's always going to need to be like a human element that's managing these things. Do you guys remember, so I always think back as well to Pluralize, which was kind of like the first thing I can kind of remember that was like this computer generated grouping of clips back in whenever that came out, 2008.
It was like the mid
2009.
2000s. Yeah, I remember playing.
Yeah,
it.
and it's, you know, even though it would like try to match these different waveforms to make sure that groups were synced up, it was always like a little bit off, right? Like you always, like assistant editors always had to go in and kind of tweak it and make sure that it was right. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm also not super concerned on the posts side because I think no matter what, we're always going to be addressing, like you said, the note behind the note, or trying to decipher. You might have like several showrunners that are giving different notes, and you're like, I don't think a computer could take all of this information in and understand what these notes are. There might be like slang that we use, there might be different terminology that I just don't think that AI has on the post side. And that's not to say that it won't grow and get better over the years, but I do think there's always going to have to be some sort of human element, because again, we're telling stories as authentically as we can and as nuanced as we can, and a computer does not have nuance. Period.
Yeah. No, and it's that nuance of human emotion again that I really think is going to differentiate us and protect us as long as possible. So just to go further down into that, going back to you, Malinda, what are your thoughts on the value of interpreting the note underneath the note?
I mean, I think, yeah, that's what our job is, and our, you know, kind of deciding like what is the perspective that you're looking through in a scene. You know, I feel like AI, and maybe this is just the point out we're right now, but might be really great at doing kind of a line cut, you know, the same way you would if you were live cutting something where you're just switching cameras real fast. But at some point, somebody has to go back and evaluate it. But also, you know, if they're just, I know I saw an article where they were saying they had taught AI to kind of match cut. But if you're just on the person who's talking, that's not necessarily where the story is, where the emotion is. You know, it might be that you're going to spend a lot of time on somebody's face going through the process of whatever emotion they're listening to. And I don't think AI is there. How do you teach a machine to understand expression in the eyes, subtle facial twitches? And sure, they have that for like, you know, profiling and security cameras and stuff, but I don't know that we're there. And I think, yeah, the human element of understanding, you know, what is the perspective, or what is the note behind the note, that is something you learn as a person going through your life, going through many different, working with different showrunners or different stories. And I don't know how that if we get to that point with AI, like then we're in the matrix. So then it's a whole new problem, right? Because we're going to just be plugged in somewhere. So I don't know yet. When machines can really understand human emotion to make those decisions, then I think we're in trouble. But I just don't know how you teach that yet.
Yeah, and I could ask if we're not already in the matrix, but that's a totally different conversation for a different episode, and something I think about often. But we're not going to go there now. But what I wanted to bring Matthew back into the conversation for a little bit, given that you two have, even though the resume not might reflect it as much, kind of bounced all over the place. Where do you see the value in you being able to interpret the note underneath the note?
Well, I mean, the note underneath the note, it might end up being lose that entire section, lose the thing that's even creating the note in the first place. Might be the decision that you're making in unscripted. I don't know that if AI would know to do that. What if you know, when you're in unscripted, you know, especially on a first season show, everybody knows that, you know, first seasons, really not just unscripted, but in general, are always a thing. It's a task, you know, especially first episodes of first seasons. So and always music is a big thing. Figuring out the sound of the show. Now, I don't want to call out anybody in specifically, but I as an editor, also, music is another big passion of mine. And we all have, yes, music, it's subjective, of course. We've all heard that 1,000 times and said it 1,000 times, but also music categorization. When people describe, could we have something, more upbeat, like drum, like, suspense, but fun pop drop? And you're like, what, like, and like, so when people start trying to describe music and they can't, how's AI going to deal with something like that? I mean, as an editor, I'm like, all right, I just need to put something that's going to pop more or better or do this kind of thing. And then that's just something that I don't think AI is going to be able to read between the lines and deal with, because genres will be thrown at you, but that doesn't mean that is what you should do for the note to make it to address it. So that's I mean, those are two examples right there, I would say. I mean, like, one, losing, like, sometimes it's just losing the problem in it, itself, and sometimes it's with especially with music and style things. It's like, I think that I don't know that AI can decipher the language that's used sometimes and read between the lines of what's actually said to do what's actually needed.
I can't even decipher between the lines and understand the notes and know what the hell anybody wants. How's a machine going to do it, right? And one area that I think of specifically, and Fady, this might be one where you can help out a little bit more as a feature editor. In my world of feature editing, did a fair amount of testing. This is one of the things that in TV you don't get nearly as much of the testing process. Maybe if you're on a pilot, I've been in the room before where you watch the people turn the dials and you see the graphs go up and down. But in the feature world, you can do a test screening and you get all of this data and all the different quadrants. And I can't even imagine what would end up being the outcome if you just said, ChatGPT, interpret all of the data in these surveys and edit, please, right? So talk to me about some of the challenges that maybe you've had going through the test screening process and where you've brought value in being able to discern what the note is underneath the note.
Well, a lot of things like music, audio, of course, DCP tests, insane hand distributors coming back to some notes like it's long or it's not long, and like sometimes like, oh, this film is very long, and like I don't think AI will do like anything about this. I will not try it on ChatGPT or something like, oh, the film is so long, can you cut it for me, or can you make sure like this scene is shorter or something like this? Of course, I'd say it's impossible, but we still don't know where's the AI going. Even if it's going like higher or like better and this stuff, AI will never have very like the most important thing which is empathy, which means like actually Matthew said it in the beginning about AI, the audience. We like to see humans. We like to see like people, like people who made this film or something like this. But at the same time, as audience too, we like flows of the character, to feel empathy, to feel like, oh, I can be this guy, or I can be this girl, or I can be these kind of things. And AI will not understand that. And all of you guys said it, like about the cut, emotions, face, all these kind of things. We will get these notes, and like you said, also sometimes you'll be like, it doesn't make sense, or you cannot do anything else. But the AI will just give you the basic or something, but will not be the brain who's going to create this or to be creative. Yeah,
I think this idea of if it needs to be 5 minutes shorter, especially in TV, I can't imagine, because I'm sure everybody in TV, especially in broadcast, are like, it's perfect, lock picture. We're 47 seconds long. We'll just take it out and then lock picture. Can you imagine saying to AI, make this 47 seconds shorter? It's not going to do it one frame at a time or 2 frames at a time. It's just going to lop all this crap out, and all of a sudden you have to start all over. And that to me is where I'm really not worried at all. But the biggest thing that you said, that if there's one takeaway, it's empathy, right? So I've been saying that once AI figures out empathy, game over. That's it. Because that's what we bring more than anything else, is empathy and our ability to communicate the human experience. I don't know a whole lot about the technology itself. It sounds like we're a long ways away. When that moment comes, we're in big trouble, but I don't think any of us have to worry about it. But the area that I kind of want to close this off today is actually a thread that Steph, without knowing it, pulled at the very beginning of this conversation. And that is the fact that having all of this diverse experience makes for a more fulfilling career and life. This is the piece that I think so many people miss. We are so myopically trained and driven to specialize. You go to college to do one thing, you pick a major, you graduate from college, and you have to be this one thing, you have to specialize. And as soon as you divert your attention, you become scatterbrained. Why can't you just grow up, pick a thing to do, and be one thing? And that to me just destroys any semblance of being able to build a more fulfilling career in life. So I'm going to kind of go around the room and end the conversation on this thought, but I want to start with you, Steph, and how you feel that every different thing that you've done, whether it's unscripted, scripted, the nonprofit stuff, the PSA stuff, has not just lent to the fact that you're now a 3-time Emmy nominee, but your life is just more fulfilling and fun because of it.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think it applies not only, on the post-production side, like in anyone's life. If you're like, hey, I did these, I went and traveled, or I did this, it's all stuff that adds to your life experience, and it adds to just, I guess, just making your day-to-day interesting. I think as creatives, like, so much of our job is like just trying to figure out new and cool ways to maybe tell stories. So it's, you're almost always, when you have diverse genres and things that you bounce between, it's like you're never fully settling, you're never fully making yourself like comfortable, right? Which is like the perfect formula, I think, for you to grow as a creative. And when you grow in that sense, you're also growing just in like a life sense as well. I think you have a diverse range of people that way to interact with. Like if you're working on, say, a comedy one day, a drama one day, a horror another day, those are all very different types of people. And the more people we kind of interact with, the more like fulfilling in general I think life can be, because you just gain so much more perspective. So I don't know if that's answers your question exactly. It's maybe a rambly answer, but I feel I just feel like it's crucial for us as people to have a diversity of experiences. And someday when we're all old and gray and thinking back, it's like, oh yeah, remember when I worked on this thing, or remember when I went on this trip, or remember when I like met this person I never would have met otherwise. Like, it's all just building out experiences and enjoying.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I would imagine that, despite all of the success that you've had professionally, you're probably not going to look back someday and say, well, I missed out on all of these life experiences, but look at the awards that I have on my shelf, right? You're going to be one of the few that can probably look back on both and say, look at all the amazing experiences that I have, and look at all the awards that I have on my shelf, right? But at the end of the day, I think we're better as creatives the more we get out of the edit bay, or the more we get out of the office. Because again, if you want to bring diversity of experience and voices, you need to actually be out in the world to be a better storyteller, right? But the industry, oh no, you got to stay in your small dark room, and you got to do your thing all day every day and do the same thing, and you got to be the square peg in the square hole, right? And the fact we're getting out there and diversifying just our life experiences makes this a more fulfilling process. Right. And you brought up a very interesting and important word that I know that Malinda is very, very familiar with, which is discomfort. So Malinda, talk to me a little bit more about the discomfort of having gone through these transitions, and how this diversity has led to a more fulfilling career in life for you.
I mean, I think it's just also, it keeps you from, like moving out of your comfort zone and not staying in, it can also be so comfortable when you're like, oh, I've done this show before, I know exactly how to do it, just move through the paces. But there comes a point, and I think probably all of us have felt that, where you're like, oh, I'm just starting to do, this is starting to feel rote, and like I'm doing the same thing every day, and that's not good for your creativity or your brain in general. So I think that discomfort of saying, okay, I know I can do this really well, but I'm getting to be too good at this, and I need to see what else is out there, because otherwise even that work is going to start to suffer, because you're not, you're just doing the same thing all the time, and it's not fresh or creative. So it's like you kind of have to get that like kind of jump start to your system by being like, okay, I'm going to throw myself into this whole new thing, and I don't know any, it's like going to a new high school, where you're like, I don't know any of the editors on this show, because they've all been doing the same kind of show together for the last like 15 years. And you show up with your like lunch bag at lunch, and you're like, oh, who am I going to sit with? but it's those moments that help you grow, because then you're meeting all these new people. They have a whole new set of skills that you've never seen, and maybe you also have stuff that they haven't done because they've also been doing what in maybe in their lane for a little bit. So I just think it keeps everybody fresh, and it just keeps your mind, even they tell older people, do crossword puzzles, or you got to keep your mind fresh, because even if you're really good at what you're doing, at some point you're going to stagnate and you got to switch things up. So I think that's like, yeah, the discomfort is you got to go to a new high school and you got to sit at somebody else's lunch table and learn from them, because then you've got a lot more to like pull from.
I don't even recognize who you are, Malinda. I don't even recognize you anymore, because 3 years ago, just the mere thought of putting yourself out there and networking and connecting with people was worse than life itself. And now you're telling people, go to a new high school with a new lunch bag and just break in with the clicky kids and say hi. Like, who are you? I don't recognize you.
I mean, I would still be pooping myself. Don't get me wrong. Like, there would be like buckets of sweat, but it's like, what would Zach say? So.
I love it. The fantastic advice. Moving on now to you, Fady. Do you find that in all the various areas that you've been on set, production, post-production, and otherwise, that it's just lent to the journey being more fulfilling for you?
I would say yes, of course. You're learning a lot. You have more experience in in the film industry, with all the field, like all departures. You have you already like. You don't have routine too, which I feel like all creators really hate routine. They don't like to just wake up and go to work or something like this every day. So I don't have this too. So I'm like, sometimes I'm in projects, sometimes like I have between projects. So let's have fun a little bit, and then I would be stuck for 7 months in feature or something like this. It really helped me as be happy in what I'm doing. And also as an editor, I like to go with this genre and this genre and that genre, everything. So of course it helped me as a human to understand more like comedy, romantic, action, horror, everything. It opened my mind, made me like teach myself new things, teach new languages, these kind of things. So of course, yes, it is, especially in the film industry, I'd say. Yeah.
And my favorite word that you said amongst all the others was, it just makes you happy. Just makes you enjoy the process more, which, by the way, makes you better as a creative at what you do. Right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So lastly, moving on to Matthew, do you feel that all of the diversity and all the various interesting things you've been involved with have just made the journey more fun and more fulfilling?
Absolutely. While my resume is, almost entirely unscripted reality, but different genres within that, I've always had my other creative vices, and I would say both they're, like, for instance, I keep bringing it back to music, but I was when I lived in New York City for like 12 years, I was in like a really serious band. We were signed and everything, and like we played out in New York like quite a bit, and but we all had like serious jobs, and it was a release in that it was like okay, I had my creative job, and then I had my creative like outlet, like where I got to release my creativity in a way that there weren't any rules, or I didn't have to satisfy a client. The client really was myself, and I think it's important to have those things. I think that it helps I think as creators, I think it's good to have other creative projects and things in your life to give yourself that balance. I also, like I'm sitting here like, I'm jealous of all of you guys getting work in scripted. I'm like hoping that I'm not the best self-promoter. Like I just recently started to get my IMDb page together, my LinkedIn and all. I'm like horrible at that stuff. Like that's not where my strengths lie. And so I'm trying to get ahead of that a little bit. But I will say that, I think that whenever something starts to feel too easy and too sort of like formulaic, or you're fitting, like, it's a good time to maybe change it up, and even within the same project, and even on a day-to-day basis, like if something's feeling too easy with a scene or an edit, I'm like, is there another way I could do this that is maybe a little bit more interesting and surprising? And so when something starts to feel too obvious and too easy, I don't know, for me, I'm always like, and this is with any creative endeavor, I'm always like, I'm like, no, that can't be right then. Like if it's too easy, it's like I gotta like, and I might end up back there, but I have to explore other ways of doing it. And I might end up back at that easy way, but I have to explore some other ways before I just make that call, like that's the way to go. Yes, we're editors, we are decision makers, we have to make decisions, but I think the way to make an informed decision is by exploring other options, and then you can really make an informed decision. Sometimes the schedules don't allow for all of that for us, so we have to prioritize when we can do that. But yeah,
I'm in the same position as you, where every once in a while I'm putting together a scene and I cut a piece of music under it and I'm like, it's perfect. Well, that's not possible. I need to spend an entire day going through music bins, seeing 8 different options. Then at the end of the day, I'm like, damn it, the first one was the best, right? And you go with it. And like you said, it's about exploring those other options. So I've definitely been there before. I can say if you're looking to figure out, well, how is it that I can kind of change the narrative? If you're really interested in getting into the scripted world, shameless self-promotion, might know a guy that can help with that. Malinda's definitely shaking her head. Yes. But the ultimate reason that I offer this service, and this is a much bigger picture thing just beyond job placement, is that I firmly believe that we are much more than our resumes. The industry wants us to be our resumes, and the more we attach our identities to our job titles and the work that we do, the worse our mental health, the more frequently we become burned out, and the less creative energy we have to bring to a project. And I feel everybody here is the personification of, you are not just your resume, there's something more, and that value is what has led all of you to ultimately become Emmy nominees. So having said that, is there anything else that anybody here feels absolutely necessary to share, that if I were to close off this conversation, like, oh, but I didn't say this one thing? Is there anything else that anybody wants to share before we wrap this up today? I'm going to take the crickets as a resounding no.
War on AI. No, just
yeah, well, there's plenty of more of that to come from my world, because I'm talking about this stuff 24/7. But at this point, I'll wrap up today's conversation and say that I personally have learned a tremendous amount from all of you. Very happy to now have all of you in my network, and hope to connect with all of you further. But having said that, I want to thank Impact24 immensely for reaching out and putting this together today. I had an absolute blast. I just kind of plant the seed. Would love to do more of these with creative, brilliant minds in the future. But I wish all of you the best of luck. So thank you, Steph, Matthew, Fady, and Malinda, for being here and sharing all of your experiences and your insights with the audience today. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.